IVM.
अर्चित हेलो सुनो हेलो एक्सक्यूज मी सर सुन लो हेलो
बोलो
हाँ इतना कर फुटेज ले रहा अच्छा लास्ट वीक आई गॉट दिस इंटरेस्टिंग इनवाइट okay by Penguin Books and saying hey Sadaf we are doing this beautiful book launch you should come it would be fun yeah this and that and etc idhar udhar ki baatein and I was like okay I shall I'm like who the author who what book author please so then they said author is Charmaine and like who and the book is her new book I didn't know the name of the book as yet because it was a big launch at Taj Loya in Delhi so you might think that I went for Taj Loya because food but no why because I was fasting so I couldn't get food I didn't eat anything but I went for Charmaine now as Archit and we both listeners are listening we often quote our favorite authors we talk about their work and we look at any wherever we are stuck whichever thing that we want we go to them right today Archit as you can see on the left or right side of your screen we have a guest Dr. Charmaine O'Brien Doctor why because she did her PhD in 2017 she did and she with focus on psychology of creativity and creative development we'll come to that as well these are really heavy words where I want to understand that but Charmaine welcome to Naan podcast for people who are in the food space they know Charmaine very well but people who don't should also know her because one of her fantastic book Penguin Food Guide to India got so many claims and so many awards and everyone, including us, pretty much were talking about this particular book. Charmaine is from Australia, but she takes a particular interest in Indian food. We'll ask her why she's interested in Australian food later. Like, what is so wonderful about our food? What is so not wonderful about Australian food? All these inside news we will get. With that long monologue, Charmaine, welcome to Naan podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here. And looking forward to the conversation.
We are going to grill this conversation. No pun intended.
Yeah. Good.
How do you grill a conversation, Sadaf? You grill the...
Australians are all about grills.
But we won't grill the conversation. Or the guest. We will gently saute. So, welcome to the show, Charmaine. I have read your books extensively, as I was mentioning offline. And I've also been reading your interviews lately, and you mentioned that you did not come to India for the food. And you also mentioned that you had a disinterest in food while growing up in your childhood years. Given those two factors, how did you start writing about Indian food?
I don't know, maybe it's been a mistake. I've always been very interested in food. I have a very strong interest in food ever since I was a kid, particularly eating it. So that, I don't know, that maybe that's been a misquote there. But in terms of Indian food, when I first came to India, I had only ever eaten Indian food in an Indian restaurant in Australia. And this is also going back 25 years. And I didn't really like it. I mean, it wasn't intolerable, but it was generally kind of really oily, really full of chili, really salty, and it all kind of seemed to be the same. So when I came here for the first time, I did not come for the food. I came, I thought I was going to be going up to the mountains and I wanted to party in Goa and see the Taj Mahal and, all those kind of stereotypical things. Yeah. But what was going on for me was I have had professional cookery training. I did have a catering business, but I also was an aspiring food historian. So when I came to India and I was alert to food, even though I had no I thought I was going to come here. I wasn't worried about what I'd eat. I just thought I'd be eating that kind of Indian restaurant food all around the country. And it was something I was kind of here nor there about. So when I came and I could even just traveling around on buses and trains, I could just see, then when you got on the railways, you could go like a couple of 100 kilometres down the track and you get quite different food that was brought onto the train or that was being sold on the railway station. So I just was really alert to that. But I think I was particularly alert to it because I had this sort of budding food historian in me and I was interested in food. So that's what alerted me to it. Now, the other thing about that, bringing in the Australian aspect, is Australia doesn't have an Indigenous food culture, and I'm using Indigenous with a small I, because when the British colonised Australia, they almost decimated the foodways of Australia's First Nations people. Mm-hmm. And they brought in an industrial food system as soon as they could. When they first came, they did eat native or Indigenous foods. So we Australians on the whole do not eat any foods that belong to Australia. Some seafood, but even now we're bringing in more and more seafood that's coming from fish farms in Asia, and macadamia nuts, although I wouldn't say macadamia nuts are an everyday food. In terms of everyday food, Australians eat nothing that belongs to the soil. And of course, we grow things in the soil, but nothing that's Indigenous. We also eat the same food all around the country. I mean, we're a huge continent with almost as many different, geographies and climates as India, although we don't have we're pretty flat country. We don't have the high mountains, but we eat the same food all around the country. So when I came to India and I saw this unbelievable diversity, I was blown away, and I thought, I want to write about this. So I was looking for a subject as a food historian, and India was there. It gave it to me.
Lovely. So, by the way, the quote that I was mentioning earlier, I found it in the print newspaper, and it goes, and I may have misread it or misinterpreted it, where it goes, the disinterest in food that I had felt during my childhood years was transformed into a new kind of need for that food as an essential connection to home. I longed for my native food as I dealt with my dislocation from the throbbing Bombay metropolis.
That's not my quote.
Okay.
That is a quote. That is a genuine quote. But in the book, I've certainly I can't remember the name of the author, but it's absolutely attributed in the book. So if somebody's pulled that out into an article and attributed it to me, that's actually not correct.
Okay.
I didn't grow up in Bombay, so.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was wondering now. So I will write to the print and tell them about their mistake. Mm-hmm. But it's fascinating what you mentioned about Australia. You hear so many innovations happening in Australia when it comes to food. Do you think a reason for that is because there are no existing hang-ups or traditions that have been existing for a long period of time? So it's easier to innovate, change, and be more dynamic.
Definitely. Because I think underneath it all, Australians are very aware of, we know because we don't have that, even though we actually do have a food, Anglo-Australians who are still the largest part of the population, or have a very multicultural population. We do have a food history. We do have food traditions, but we don't want to know about them. We don't think they're interesting. It's actually what my Ph.D. was partly about. So, we definitely, because we're not tied to traditions, because we don't have kind of hang-ups about food and stereotypes about who eats what and what that might actually represent, we're definitely more open to all these food trends. But even though this is my beloved country, we're not as innovative of food as you might think. Most food trends emerge from the US or from the UK that we take on. That's changing a bit, but often when I see things, you can trace them back to one of those two places. We're probably better with incorporating Asian ingredients because Asia's obviously on our doorstep. So we definitely do innovation, but I think we're very good at making it look like we do it. And yet, look, we do have a fabulous food culture. And I think just that we're very open to other food cultures. We love it actually. Like there's always keen to, be going to the new, the next new restaurant and, chasing after things. But I'm not sure how innovative we are. I think MasterChef made it look like we're extremely innovative.
Yeah, that's one show that did tell us that there's so much of food happening in Australia, and that's
there definitely is.
Yeah.
But I just think that if you can trace a lot of it back to elsewhere.
All right.
Yeah. In our first conversation at the event on Sunday, it was Friday.
Yeah.
Yes. There's also a discussion that you talked about, the curry in itself, and which is what before this recording as well I was talking about it, how the things have changed over the period of time, and you have seen it all, and we'll come to your book as well in a bit. But first, your past work, you talked about the curry that you have had in Australia itself, and then when you had it in India. So I wonder, what was the food like, the naan like, and the curry like, the naan and the curry of Australia? In Australia, the Indian food in Australia, and contrast to that when you came to India, and how did you, and because you keep on traveling for the book, for work and everything else, and how did you change that, changing over not the eating habit as of now, but just the preparation habit itself over the period of time?
Okay. Yeah. So again, Indian food in Australia, that my experience of it, and it's only recently started to change, was that very typical, kind of Mughalai North Indian menu that had a few regional dishes on it, but cooked in Punjabi style. And most of the restaurateurs come to Australia early on would have been from North India and very likely to be Punjabis. So, and it was just all the same, like every restaurant had the same menu. And the dishes, I used to joke and say, I think you could order every dish off the menu and you'd find that they pretty much all tasted the same. Because I think they were doing that thing where they had two gravies and they just chucked different ingredients in. And it was heavy, it was oily, it was greasy, a lot of it. So that's there. That's only really started to change. I think most Australians probably still think that's what Indian food is, and it's what they want when they go to an Indian restaurant, right? So of course restaurateurs will keep providing that because that's what their market is. One thing again, MasterChef has had a number of Indian contestants on. I think that's helped to shift people's perceptions. I think that restaurateurs are starting to put more, different dishes on, regional dishes, serve them in a bit more of a contemporary way. So that's happening. In terms of the quality, I think the quality of the food's improved. I mean, I live in Sydney, and I think Sydney has some pretty good and interesting Indian food emerging. But the other thing is, so when I go to an Indian restaurant, I'm always looking, I very often have like tandoor because I can't cook that at home. So I think we get really great naan and stuff in Australia, but I think, you'd be paying anywhere to 300-400 rupees for a naan for one. So there's a big difference there in the price of what, because they're exotic in Australia. They're an exotic thing. So nobody has a nobody has a tandoor in Australia really, and they're not like they're on the street or they're not common. So they're pretty expensive to buy. But in terms of that, I think the quality of that's pretty good. Anyway, I think the quality of Indian food in Australia is improving, and I think Australians are keen to explore new dishes. Now, what I noticed between my experience of that when I first came and food in India was just how fresh and light a lot of the food was. You could still get that Indian restaurant food if you went to a typical tourist restaurant, but if you went off grid and you just walked into some local places, you'd get this food that was quite, and that was even in a restaurant, let alone going into a home and really having that experience of that fresh, light, seasonal food that people eat. So that's kind of the contrast there. In my observation, and this goes back to a conversation we were having pre-recording, is that there is a lot more, people are really seeking convenience in food. So they're looking to, shortcut some of the more laborious food. Like they still want to eat the same, like they still want to have dosa or idli or, filter coffee or the same, or, a really diverse mix of vegetables, but they're happy to, to buy that in a packet now. Yogurt. The first time I came, when I was living in Delhi in 2000, I said to my friend Kinney, why can't I buy yogurt? Like everybody here eats it. Now I discovered then you could actually buy it like at a confectioner, but I didn't know to go into it like what looked to me like a sweet store to buy yogurt or curd. So she said, everybody just makes it. She told me how to make it. Yeah. And I live right across the road from a Mother Dairy booth. So I'd go down with my little milk pail and I'd get the milk and I had to buy a little bit of yogurt from the confectioner and I'd just keep making it. And there was no waste, or it was great. I loved it. But even that now, like I know people still make it at home, but there's so much packaged yogurt available. So that I've seen that, I think, is a change, the biggest change in terms of what people are doing at home, which is where most meals are prepared still, even though there's more outside food coming in. That's probably my biggest sort of broad observation.
Yeah.
I think people are, taking new things into their day-to-day food. So again, that often comes in a packet. Cakes, I mean, the cake thing, there's all, people are having a lot, more sort of, Euro, American or Western style, cakes and bakes and pastries. But again, a lot of the time that's bought in as opposed to being prepared at home.
I have like two follow-up questions. Question one is just a matter of fact. When you mentioned about the MasterChef shows, and you also mentioned about the show during the book launch as well, did you know I was on the show as well in India?
On Australian MasterChef?
No, Indian ones, of course. Yeah.
No, I just read that. I didn't know that you're on it.
Now you do. But
oh, wow.
What I'm saying is, it was really interesting because we had people from Australia coming in, Australian production house. They came over, and then they were, in a way, guiding, overlooking a few of the episodes of how it should be, like how we should how the production team should produce, and also then how we are serving the food. Contrast was that the same Indian food which was being served in Australian MasterChef was not really that pleasant looking. They were just putting it unabashedly Indian, and that's what really interesting, because we are supposed to be putting it in Australian manner, and then Australian MasterChef, Indian people were just putting it as it is. So if it's a samosa, it will go as it is. If it's a panta bhat, it will go as it is. Nobody is going to question, oh, that looks ugly.
Yes, so that's interesting. I didn't know, and I have to say, look, I'm not. I think Australian MasterChef, with the three guys, I think that was brilliant. That was like a piece of magic, that show.
Yeah.
I think what you're describing there is that Australians want authenticity, right? They want authenticity in their food, because we do feel like we don't have anything rooted of our own.
Yeah.
Whereas you guys want something different, right? You want, you've got all that stuff. You've got gazillion different dishes, and you're so rooted, your food is so rooted in here in India, that you want actually to make it look different and to jazz it up. So you got two different kind of needs of an audience there.
Yeah, I suppose.
I think is what happening's there.
No, so the follow-up question was basically on the lines of that, when you mentioned about the curd itself or the yogurt, right? Like, for example, when I read up older books versus the newer modern age books, I find the recipe itself has changed. So the same thing about ease. Or when I look at people cooking in the kitchen, right? Many of these legacy kitchens, many of these old restaurants, right? For example, when you're making a korma or a mutton something, you're not necessarily adding cream in that, right? Or cheese in that to give it a velvety texture. It's just it just comes out of the gelatin. You need to cook it on slow, and then everything like that. But in the modern times, I've seen that changing, and people starting adding to sort of add cream in their sauce, right? And also I've seen the same in the menu itself, in the recipe, when people are creating. So now the mutton korma will have cream in it. I remember there was the first book that I wrote, and I was looking for this one recipe of a particular kind of a korma, and then that mentioned about tomato. And in my head, I'm like, no, but korma doesn't have tomato. So then I call a bunch of the people from the old generation, and then they said, no, that particular korma only has yogurt. So that's something. Did you also notice that sort of change, like these little nuances which people may or not necessarily know, at least the young ones know?
It's interesting because now that you point out, I'm not saying I have necessarily noticed that, but now that, because I did a whole book from Nizamuddin Basti, so I got a real education in Indo-Muslim cookery, and there was no cream in the korma. But that is to cook a korma and get that gelatin out of the bone, and really kind of, that's painstaking work, right? You've got to really put a lot of time into to get that happening. And that's what people are not doing, is they're not putting the time in. So putting the cream in, which I'm sure is just, it's like a quick fix. And yes, so I think that is happening because people haven't got time. I could sometimes be hours with people in their homes while they were making those sort of dishes, that it was all done kind of quite slowly. And also you've got it, people were cooking over coal, and that you can get that really slow heat. And I remember sometimes just kind of being almost kind of mesmerized because people would stir things and work on things over quite a period of time. And that's what's, I think, that's where the convenience is coming in, because people haven't got the time. They don't want to spend the time. They're cooking on, stovetops that don't allow you that kind of slow cooking even. And I think that's where convenience can potentially sort of erode food culture a bit. I don't think it's ever going to erode it. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's going to erode India's food culture, but it'll encroach on it. That, so that people are nobody knows that a korma, it's that you get, you let the gelatin come out of the bones and stuff. People just, as you say, young people perhaps just think it's got cream in it.
Correct. That's my takeaway as well.
I think that's where we often criticize food snobs and people who have a lot of hang-ups and could be considered in food high culture. We often criticize them, but I guess they have a space as well because they often maintain traditions, like they want to do things the right way or the traditional way rather than doing it the fast modern way. So it's sometimes they're very arrogant about their approach, but I guess they have a space as well in maintaining those traditions.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, it is an art. It's an often painstaking work. But I think, I don't know if it's that, as I said, I think convenience is a double-edged sword because most meals are still prepared in the home in India by women. So what convenience is doing is it's allowing them to start to cut back on the labor that they have to put in to putting meals on the table. But the potential other side of that is it potentially can erode, food cultures and lead to a bit of standardization and homogenization of food.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have two thoughts on that. One, from a nutrition point of view. Often we see the cost of fast and processed food the immediate cost is cheap, but then the long-term cost, the health cost, the cost of it on your body is much more. And that's again a case for traditional food. That's one. Second, I'm getting married later this year, and I'm trying to.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm trying to fix a menu for my wedding, and I have realized it's very hard to move away from the standardized boilerplate menus that most North Indian weddings have, North Indian Hindu weddings have. So I guess, I don't have a point there. I just wanted to share that example. Like it's the costs associated with moving away from the standards are very, very high. So everyone wants you to have the standard dal, butter chicken, rogan josh menu. They have certain innovation here and there, but most venues want you to serve that to your guests. And
how many people are you having at your wedding?
That's a good question. Still deciding.
But like a couple of 100, 300, 400?
Double that.
Yeah, so exactly. So that's the other. Yeah, so this is the other thing. I mean, that's an enormous number of people, right? In some ways, that being the standard that you're having so many people. I mean, I don't even know many people in Australia that would be having a wedding of that size, right? You kind of also push yourself down that standardized menu thing.
That is true. That's a very good point.
Such huge numbers of people. And unless you're prepared to pay an enormous amount of money, that's what's going to happen.
That's true, actually. That's a very good point. Sadaf, I have a question for you. Since Charmaine mentioned the use of tandoor in Australia, I'm curious, can you make naan in a barbecue grill?
No, because... So tandoor, I love tandoor. This is one of my absolute favorite utensils. I don't know how to use it though. But the science behind the tandoor, the technique is very different versus the grill. If you put it right on top of the grill, you are going to burn the whole bread from the base. However, if you elevate the whole thing and then like a oven, right? So if you lift put like another grill on top of a grill, at least give a height of like a feet or and a half, and then that will slowly cook it. You still will not necessarily get the same feel like a tandoor, because tandoor is a flash cooking. It's like a minute or two and it's done. It's super hot. And but also you also have to realize that to bake breads in a tandoor and to bake chicken or mutton or veg in a tandoor are different. You need an optimal, because what happens on the sides of the tandoor, right? The walls of it, the bread has to stick. And when will it stick? If the temperature is optimal. If it goes really high, it's never going to stick. Unlike the thing. So it's very unique that way. Tandoor is unique that way. Grill may not.
What about a wood-fired pizza oven?
That will do.
Make an oven
that will do. So even with what you're doing with a wood-fired pizza oven is like you're keeping the fire away, right? A little away from the bread itself. So I mean, if you think of a pizza base, it's similar to a naan or the khamiri roti, which is similar, right? So yes, that'll work wonderful. So it's either in a wood fire, you are having the fire a little away, or from the base, and then you have got really fat griddle on top. So it just gives that heat.
I think that also speaks to, baking is such an art. What in any culture, like, be it like, okay, a naan's a simple, like it might be simple ingredients, but you've got to massage that temperature till it's, as you say, just right, So, any baking, like as I said, I'm trained as a professional cook, and to do like really excellent baked goods, it's the one thing you've got to be really precise with in terms of your measures and your measures and how much liquid goes in, and whereas other things you can be a bit more, a bit looser with.
Correct.
But it really is a fine art.
Yeah, it does.
That's true.
I will share
I suck at it.
I'll share my personal story. A couple of days back, I was, so Archit knows about this. I was at Taj, Bombay, and we were doing Ramzan special week, and I was cooking there. And I said that I love tandoor, but I'm not a tandoor chef, and that's a different thing altogether. So I was making this kebab and had the marinated meat, massaged the meat very well. I wanted it a little juicy, unlike most of the kebab that you get. The seekh kebabs, the minced meat kebab, they get dried up a little too fast. So what I wanted is to sort of add a lot more of fat in that, ghee and everything, so that it remains soft. Now I did that. That was my idea. That and again, telling you because I'm not a tandoor chef, so I assume that this, because when Charmaine, as you said, when you're cooking, you're a trained cook. You would know, you can easily adjust things once it goes in the pan. So that's not a problem. But what I did, I gave him this whole batch, and I said, okay, take this. And now you're going to grill it. And he was trying to put it on the seek. He was failing to do it. He said, there's too much fat in this. And that's what's like, there's so much of intricacies you would think, because I was applying brain as a cook. And that I'm going to put it on the fire and then I'll be sorted. But then I got a good bashing from him saying, this is not how you work in tandoor. So then we had to freeze it so that the seekh can hold the meat. The fat then got...
Yes. Yeah.
So I was like, it
is an art.
I've seen a few burger recipes and also kebab recipes where they say that, after making the burger patty, just freeze it or put it in the fridge so that the fat inside it freezes, and when you cook it, it doesn't immediately melt. Like it stays.
Yeah.
Like
that's the idea. Yeah, that's the idea.
Charmaine, I have to ask you about the Penguin Food Guide to India. I think it's a phenomenal book, and
thank you.
For those who haven't checked it out, it's a comprehensive guide to the diverse regional cuisines of India, and it's divided by states. So what I really like, and I apologize in advance to others for this opinion. I find often when the global West is writing about Indian food, there are certain tropes. I didn't find those tropes in your book. I found I could see that the author, which is you, was genuinely curious about the topic that they're writing about, and you've dug very deep and asked the right questions to the people you've spoken with in your journey. So did you travel around the country to this book? And how did people react to you asking such questions about Indian food?
I did a lot. I essentially, I mean, that built up on, because, I did a book about Delhi, and then I did the book from Nizamuddin Basti, and I'd already traveled a lot. That book took me, I spent a year traveling in India, not all at once, but all up I spent a year specifically traveling for that book. As you know, I've been to, apart from going to 3 of the northeastern states, because for different reasons, I've been to every state of India. I've been to many different places in some of those states, some more than others. I went into people's homes. I think what helped me was, first of all, I was determined. Like I'll challenge I'll challenge stereotypes. I was fascinated that. See, what happened also was when I started telling people early on that I was really interested in India's food and I wanted to travel around, people would literally say to me, "Why? There's nothing there." Punjabis eat their food. They think their food was good, but why do you want to go to the south? It's all rice and dosa, and it's all soft,
Italy.
and Gujarati food's all sweet, and Punjabi food's too heavy. It's what Arjun Appadari, who's a Indian American food scholar, calls gastro-ethnic stereotypes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was amazed. I was thinking, can't you see what you've got? So I was really determined just to move past those stereotypes. But look, essentially I got into people's homes. That's how I did that. And that was because of connections. And people kind of passed me around. And sometimes what would happen when I come into people's homes, even though they'd agree to it, I think they were a bit like, they were curious and they agreed to it, but then this this sort of shining Westerner comes in and they wanted to all start making me biryani and stuff because they think that's what I wanted. And sometimes I had to kind of work a bit hard to say, no, I want what you eat every day. And they'd be like, but why would that be of any interest? Because people are so immersed in it, particularly women. I mean, it's just what they do. And they were quite surprised that I would be interested in what they were doing. And I think through the kind of questions I asked, I think it also turned their heads a bit about, actually what I am doing is, it made them see what they were doing a bit differently. And also the other thing is, because I'm a professional cook, I could see what they were doing. So I could ask some kind of interesting questions around that. So, definitely travelled a lot. And, went to different places. And also the other thing I do is I just walk around. I'll get somewhere, I'll just walk the streets, I'll see what's in shops. If I see a local cafe that's busy, I'll just go in, I'll see what they've got, look at the street stalls, fruit and veggie stalls, markets, because that's what people are eating every day. Otherwise, these guys wouldn't be selling it. I mean, that's got a bit more gentrified now, but, not that long ago, things were still quite regional, like the veggies you got. And so all of that. And I read, so I did scholarly research as well, but definitely did all that field research.
Sure.
I couldn't do that book again. That was so much work. I mean, I'm really glad I did it, and it's so lovely for me to hear that people value that book and use it. But that was 4 years of work, that book. And I think if you asked me to do it again, unless someone was prepared to fund me on some kind of 5-star lifestyle around doing it, I couldn't do it again. I have been on so many bus trips in really remote parts of India that I just don't think I could do again. I don't think my body could take it. But it was wonderful, and I'm really pleased I did it.
Yeah.
And as I said, I hope that my work has because as I said, it's a broad picture. Like, I did go to a lot of different places, but there's so much that's not in there. So I really hope that it serves as an inspiration for people to do deeper dives, because could write a whole set of encyclopedias about India's food. Yeah.
So you wrote that book around, I think it's around 11 years, and now you've come up with your another book on Indian food. And you mentioned regional differences. Now, I want to know, since you've written that book and now you've thought in depth about Indian food while writing your new book, Have regional cuisines in India converged or they've diverged?
I don't think. I think they're probably pretty much as they were,
Okay.
like quite distinct. But there is a divergence happening in India, but I don't think it's necessarily with regional food.
Okay.
I think in all regions that kind of bringing in more local style convenience foods is happening, that kind of labor minimization. But what I meant was there's been a convergence, but it's in a different part of India's food culture now. I don't think they're converging in people's homes, perhaps. Maybe people are making different recipes and mixing things up. I wouldn't be surprised if a bit of that's happening. But I think it's the bringing in the kind of convenience foods that's probably more of an impact.
That makes sense to me.
I'm curious on that because when we talk about the conversions, when we talk about and especially we talk about the first one, the book where you're traveling across the country, knocking people's home, asking for food. Because now, I mean, I have a very unique love interest with Delhi, so I want to come to Delhi only.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm in Delhi too.
Yeah. See,
it's a great city.
It is
amazing city.
I love it. I mean, I don't know why I love it. I don't have a logical argument why I love it. I just love it.
You can't be logical because there's plenty to not like either. But I love it too. I mean, yeah, I think it's a fantastic city, and I think it's an underrated city in terms of its interest. But it's also not an easy city to get to know, right? As an external, as an outsider, it's not easy.
Correct. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, and that's the thing you rightly pointed it. There's so much to not like the city as well.
Yeah.
So you can't be logical in saying what do I like and what do I not like. You'll have to just weigh in.
Exactly. Just get in there and
That's why Sadaf and I have moved to Gurgaon and Noida. So we're there in Delhi, but not quite there. Like we're enjoying the high rises of the Gurgaon and Delhi. But whenever we want to enter Delhi to have some kebabs, we can easily do that.
So I would say, because Delhi has its own very unique food culture. And I'm saying this unique, I genuinely mean it. I think Delhi has got and especially with regards to street food. But, and then in your book, where you're talking about foods and street foods, but when I say unique, I know what makes it unique. But when you say unique, and because you have also mentioned about, and clearly you said you also like Delhi, what makes Delhi's street food unique for you compared to all the other parts when you were traveling and meeting people?
Well, I think that, first of all, there's different things. Look, one of the things that changed my mind about Indian food the first time I came here was eating chaat in Delhi. Like, that blew my mind. I got a professional cookery training, and I have been interested in food all my life. I was cooking family meals since I was a teenager. I just thought, I have never tasted anything like this. It was amazing. So the chaat, like the papri chaat, the like the aloo tikki chaat, pani puri or golgappa, those sort of things were really unique to me. But you get those everywhere now. Like, they've kind of gone out and they're everywhere. So it's like, I think, to me, what was unique about Delhi street food that's kind of been promulgated across the country to some degree. So sometimes if you travel around, it doesn't feel that unique anymore, even though that it is in and of itself. I certainly think if you're game and you're willing to go into some different places, there is that Indo-Muslim street food happening, which I think is still pretty unique on here. But in saying, so they're my kind of two picks for Delhi street food. I just remember having the most fabulous chole with a kulcha on what's the road that the park hotel's on? It's not Janpath, it's the next one. I can't remember.
My geography sucks. That's why I don't drive.
Yeah.
Archit,
anyway, let's say it was adjacent, the road adjacent to Janpath. There was a guy just serving these, literally out of like an oil can that he had on a stove, and it was just chole and kulcha, and it was just fantastic. And, it's all that, and he was serving it to office workers. So I think, again, kulcha is a very is a very, North Indian, or I suppose it's Punjabi thing, but, So those are the things that stick out to me as unique. But of course, you get unique street foods, wherever you go around India. Although again, I think street food is something that is getting a bit homogenized.
Yeah.
I.e., you're getting the chaat and the golgappa everywhere, even though there's different versions of golgappas in different places. But I can tell you something, what I think is really interesting about street food. Yeah. Again, when I was first coming to India, and I'd eat off street stalls, people were horrified that friends would just be like warning me off, you can't eat from street stalls. And I'd say, hey, I think that food's cleaner than most food you'd get in an Indian restaurant. The guy gets up in the morning, he buys the ingredients for the day, he's got an idea about how many serves he's going to sell, he makes it, he serves it, it's gone, he goes home, he starts fresh again. So I never really had any qualms about it. And of course, now street food is like everybody wants to eat street food. Like it's really cool to go out and eat it. I'm sure it always has been as well, but it's just that people would really, maybe it's because I was a Westerner, people would just be horrified that I was eating street food. I was like, oh my gosh, it's so fabulous, and it's clean, and provided it was cooked, of course. I wouldn't have necessarily eaten anything raw. And if I wanted golgappa, I would go to Prince Pan in GK1 to get it, because I felt like, I was confident they were using clean water. I probably wouldn't have eaten that off any street stall. But anything cooked. Also, those guys have repeat customers. They're not going to, they're going to make sure their food's good, because they want those people to come back every day. Unlike a tourist restaurant where they don't care, you're not going to come back. And there's like 400 things on the menu, and you think, oh, something's going on there that's probably not good.
Which one is your favorite chaat, by the way? When you, which chaat did you remember? Mine is Raj Kachori for people to.
Yeah, I really like really good aloo tikki chaat where they get it quite crisp, like the aloo tikki. That's excellent.
Oh, nice.
I do love a good pani puri. In fact, they're becoming really common in Indian restaurants now.
Yeah.
They weren't there before, but in Australia, they're becoming really common. But they do weird things to them. They don't use jaljeera. They put like yogurt and tamarind chutney in it, and it's just, one does butter chicken sauce in it. I know, that's just, and I always say to people, I say, oh my God, you've got to have the jaljeera. It's so fabulous. But when I have given it to Australians, they often can't. That's quite a full-on taste. So I suppose in fairness to the restaurateurs, they're trying to introduce a new concept, but they're also having to kind of modify it to suit the Australian palate.
On that, I felt hungry because we're talking about chaat, and we often, every time when we talk about street food, we talk about chaat, and nobody talks about kebabs. And I am hurt by that. I'm going to cry for a bit.
Oh.
And I'm going to go in a corner, I'll cry, and we'll come back after the break. And we're back. I am done crying. I'm done being cry baby, a sissy baby, because I ordered some kebabs already. But now, after so much of conversation about everything, we're going to talk about Charmaine's new book called, if you're watching us on YouTube, you know I'm holding a book. If you're not watching us on YouTube, I will read it to you. It's called Eating the Present, Tasting the Future, Exploring India Through Her Changing Food. It's really beautiful, fat book. It's got more than 350 pages. So yeah, published by Penguins. Now we come to the book, Charmaine. Okay. It's simple that, and I know that you talked about a little bit of the idea behind that particular book and how things are changing, and we touched upon a few of the topics which is also written in the book. But I'm curious that this particular book explores the intersection of traditional and modernity, right? And that's why I think the present and the future, maybe also touching about the past as well. But what led you write this book? Also because let me be just also very honest, in the book launch where you talked about so many brilliant ideas. I'm like, yeah, that's a book idea. That's a book idea. And that's also a book idea. So you said all these things, and I was thinking about, I can write a book on that as well. But
you can, you see. Yeah. You can go in there and go do a deep dive into any one of those subjects.
I have made notes of it.
Good.
So what made you write this particular book? Like when you were pitching it to Penguin, or Penguin came to you, whichever.
No, I pitched it. It was completely my idea.
So what was the idea that going in your head?
So as you know, my previous work had all been on, basically, let's say, India's traditional food, right? So I did that, and but when I was doing that, I was cognizant that things were changing around me. Like I could see change in food, but I kind of ignored that a bit because I had, I can only cope with one thing at a time when I'm doing a big book. But I definitely could see things were changing. Also, the other thing about that is I came to India for the first time in 1995. So you're only a few years into economic liberalisation. So India was still kind of, pretty socialist.
Correct.
It was kind of frugal India. There wasn't a lot of, like, anybody who had any kind of imported food or went to an upmarket restaurant was definitely in that kind of very elite sort of section of society. So I saw that to start with, and I could see that slowly changing. So when I finished the Penguin Food Guide, and then I went off and did my Ph.D., but I kept coming to India, and I just was really noticing this change. And so what that put me in mind of, so if I just go to the other part, and it's actually part of what my PhD is about, my other interest is in Australian food history in the 19th century, which is essentially British food history transplanted into Australia. But Australia's food culture and also the way Britain changed at that time was the product of the Industrial Revolution. And what I thought I was looking at in India was a form of an industrial revolution, albeit not about steam trains, right? But it was definitely about, more industrialization, technology, and like it did in England, increased people's prosperity. It grew the middle class. People became consumers. And I could see that happening. And I also love 19th century British novels. So to me, it looked like I was seeing history happening before my eyes. And I thought, well, I want to write about this. Like, it's fascinating because the way food changes, food doesn't change of itself. It's what you get on your plate is just a representation of all this other stuff that's happening. And that's actually what I am most interested in food, what it's about, not necessarily, I love eating and I love cooking, but my interest is how does that happen? Why does food change? And it represents initially, it's economic change. Like the economy changed. People could afford to take more chances in trying new foods. And coming with that, more things came in because the rest of the world, for example, is like, oh, India's got a massive population, and their financial wherewithal's increasing. So you've got all those kind of multinational companies that are really keen to come in, bring new foods. And initially that was like your fast food that was coming in. So it was just being. See, my advantage of being an outsider is that I notice things that most people that live here don't because you're immersed in it. Now, your immersion means you've got a deeper understanding of things overall, but often you don't see what you're surrounded by. You guys might because you're kind of more alert to things, but as an outsider and also someone that would come backwards and forwards, like I wasn't here all the time, to me the change was just amazing. That all this was happening. And I was also fascinated in what I was alluding to before about this kind of converging food culture here. And that's that kind of globalized food culture that's come in. Kind of everything else is still there, but this globalized food culture's come in such that there's so many like restaurants and cafes now that I can go to in Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore, even in some regional towns. I could be anywhere in the world. The menus, like a menu I'd get in, Australia, the atmosphere, the decor, it's like you kind of lose cognizance of the fact that you're in India. So that's that kind of globalized food culture that's come in, which has a lot to do with technology. And you've got all the kind of global food trends, particularly which the biggest global food trends at the moment are all ones around wellness and healthism. So yeah, I could just see all that happening, and I just got the idea for writing this book, and it just kind of emerged, the idea.
So there's I hear a keyword in your thing that you said about health, and that keyword is, I think, sort of latched on by Archit, so he's come with his health word. I'm somebody who, when I write, I like to write about the food and how it was, just that nostalgic factor, right? That's how my style is. So talking about the present, but also ensuring that there's some bit of past in that, and then seeing future. Now in your book, I'm going to be reading. You mentioned about home food, right? In one of the chapters, especially on the women as agents of change, and it says that home food, the words invoke a sense of nostalgia. It's never only about the food; it's the story of each dish. The love, the creativity and purity of recipes nurtured in family kitchens. Which is interesting because, again, someone like me, and there are so many in the modern time people who are cooking, we all say that we are not serving you food anymore, we are serving stories. And these are home food. People are knocking people's houses and asking for what do you eat. And that's what gets fancified and served on a platter or on a fancy plate at a restaurant. And then say, oh, nostalgia. But how did that change? Because I said, how is nostalgia now playing the role as a food, as you see the ups and downs in the food space in India?
I think, nostalgia is always there with food. It's all, but I think because the emergence of nostalgia is a really strong element in the presentation of food is also because things are changing so much. Because nostalgia helps you. I don't know if you've seen the bit. I've done a whole bit on the psychology of nostalgia.
Yeah.
Nostalgia helps you. It's like it's soothing. It makes you feel good. It kind of elicits good, I don't know, it's like, let's say it elicits good hormones or something. Like it kind of gives you a lift because it's comforting, and it often takes you back to, to feeling comfortable in a family, provided that's your experience, but, feeling comfortable in your family, feeling happy, remembering happy occasions around food, so that if you may be feeling a bit dislocated or you're not sure about something or you just feel like things are whirling around you, that kind of nostalgic element of food. And often it's that familiarity with nostalgia. But definitely that kind of comfort, and because, we all kind of, most of us glorify the past a bit. We forget the gnarly bits, and, like I wrote in it how I kind of had this big nostalgia when I was writing the book for when I lived in GK2, and suddenly I felt nostalgic. But then I thought, you know what, that was really lonely part of my life when I did that. And actually it wasn't that nice for me in many respects, but now it's got this kind of halo around it and it feels all glowing. And, I went back to GK2 recently and I walked around and, it was all kind of interesting. And there's about 4,000 pharmacies over there now, which weren't there before, which was all, interesting. So, I think it just works to ultimately soothe and comfort us in times where things are in a lot of flux is the simple answer to why nostalgia works around food. And I think also that people are just generally, there's only so much you can do with food on the plate. And because, Indians are becoming far more sophisticated consumers of, I suppose, food outside of a home and different varieties of food, so that those stories also help you kind of relate to the food and perhaps be more open to taking something in. Like if you see a new dish and there's a few lines about, this is from, Archit's mother's kitchen and he had this when he was a kid, it kind of leads you into being a bit more willing to try things as well. Yeah. So that's how, how it works. And I think there's fun in nostalgia as well.
Yeah.
And that works. It's fun to have, to do it.
Yeah. So we've spoken about the past and the present, but part of your book title says tasting the future. Now, food industry in India is rapidly evolving. I mean, rapidly is debatable, but it is evolving with a focus on sustainability.
It's always evolved.
It's always evolved with a focus on sustainability and innovation. So, in your opinion, what does the future of eating look like in India? Paint us a picture.
Yeah. Partly it probably look a lot like it looks now, but on top of that, well, if you go to an extreme, you could have robots, in cloud kitchens producing a lot of food. Maybe even robots that can produce meals for you exactly to your recipe or something. I mean, that could be an extreme.
Which is happening right now. We had a person named Ishwar Vikas on this podcast. He supplies robots cloud kitchens all over India, and these robots, they're robots for different dishes. So there's a robot for dosa, it's called Dosa-matic, and then there's a robot to create Chinese wok style dishes, and they have tons of paying customers all over India, and this is how they maintain standardization in cloud kitchens. This is how a lot of cloud kitchens maintain standardization across the country. So that's happening.
So that's already, so that's happening. I see that just becoming, more and more. And as you say, I think the robots will get more sophisticated over time. So that's one thing. Oh gosh, I had a couple of ideas when you were asking me, and now they've gone out of my head. What else? No, it's okay. There's so much to. I think one of the, again, that kind of movement of the more laborious food preparations out of the home, but potentially I think what will happen with like the regional food or just home food is, I think people will definitely, as a whole, if they've got the means, I think they'll start to minimise and simplify the food that's made in homes, right? Because people want more time, they want to do more things, or people want to go and work and get paid for it, or they want to binge watch more, more series or whatever. They want to do other things with their time. Yeah. And this could be great for women. But I think what will happen is and it's already happened, people will go out more for those more complicated dishes. Like they want to go to restaurants and have regional food because they're not really cooking it at home. So I think that will be a shift that continues. What else do I think will happen? I think there'll be more globalization of food. People will be eating, incorporating more kind of, Western style ingredients or trends into their food. One thing I've noticed that with all those kind of wellness foods, India is now producing their own versions of those. Like there was a truck, a little like a mobile grocery van that pulled into the colony where I stay in Delhi, and it was all the wellness, health, healthism trend foods, and they were all made in India. Everything was made in India. And it had gourmet foods as well, like lots of cheeses and cold cuts and all those drinks, and they're all made in India, and they're all really look very good quality. But so this is the thing I was going to say. The thing that most influences people's food when they're buying food, particularly packaged food, is branding. It's actually branding. Taste is second, and then there's other things. So I think you're going to see more and more like branded and packaged foods. But in fact, those foods they'll potentially be the same thing, a lot of it. It's like when you go to a supermarket in Australia, right, or even particularly America, there's an enormous array of cereals. And they all look different, but they're just in different boxes. A lot of them are essentially the same thing, or they're made from the same very few ingredients. And so I think that branding around food, that packaging being the most important factor, more than price, which you mentioned before, even more than taste, I think that's going to be a big part of India's food future as well.
It's vitally, I'm just thinking about kinds of the packaging that I have started seeing in the market. And it's interesting because, these small players, they know that they are smaller fish and they are taking basically head on, right? And what I have noticed is, of course, there's this new flashy, very millennial or Gen Z kind of packaging. But also it also sort of the same reeks that nostalgia in it. So there'll be like some story written in on the box itself that my dada or my grandfather used to eat this and that, and then it's across. It's on snacks, it's on coffee, it's on cereals. It's just everywhere.
And it'll have a really funky graphic of Dadi Ji or whoever they're saying had it. And they look fantastic, and they're very appealing because they're fun and they've got beautiful colours. And I think India just does. People are so clever. Like there's just some really amazing graphic work going on here. And I think because India is such a beautiful country in terms of colour, and it's always been you've got a very visual culture, and I think there's just some great stuff. And it's really appealing. It appeals to me. Like you want to take that product because it's got that funky packaging with the interesting story. It's almost in some ways a bit irrelevant what's in it. But also that branding is also related to labeling. So all that superfood, gluten-free, all those things, they're actually a form of branding as well.
Okay.
And they've certainly become very influential in India.
Yeah.
So that's just going to keep on going.
You want to be extra flashy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and that gets us to our last part, which is my favorite part of the show, where we ask our guests their underrated, overrated, and favorite dishes. So Charmaine, you're in the spotlight. What is one dish that you think is overrated?
Overrated. Let me tell me what my favorite Indian dish is, and then the other stuff I'll have to. Something else will emerge from that.
Yeah.
Because people always ask me, so I've got many, many, many things that I like in India. My favorite dish is suki aloo with fulka. Like a good suki aloo with a nice, fresh fulka. That is just a fabulous dish. And again, something you get in a home more than anything. Overrated. I'm not a big fan of gulab jamun. It's probably people probably send me hate mail for saying that.
No, I'm with you.
I think it's actually good though, because often you go to places and particularly when you're traveling and up in the hills and stuff, and what's for dessert, and they say gulab jamun, and the great thing about that is I'm like, I don't want that. So it's probably a bit overrated.
Most of them are from the same packaged boxes. None of them are really making it. It's just like same Haldiram ka box, and they're just opening it up and putting it for you.
Yeah, that's definitely an overrated thing for me. I don't know. You guys talk, because I maybe something else will pop into my head.
There's no underrated?
Underrated. Oh gosh, underrated dishes. So
I would say
when you say
aloo and roti is that's underrated, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, for you, that's something that's not rated high enough. So since you like that, I think that's one of your underrated dishes.
I mean, underrated, it's hard for me to say, because I'm thinking, for example, of food that it's not that it's underrated, but people might not know about it, because it's like the Mopla food in north of Kerala is fantastic. I love the food in Karnataka. So I think they're probably, those things are probably underrated at this moment because they're unknown, but they wouldn't be underrated by the people that eat them every day.
They're underrated in Delhi for sure.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. Yeah, so they're perhaps my underrated things. Lots of interesting things in the northeast as well, but I think people are exploring that a bit more now.
Yeah, they have definitely started to explore northeast cuisine these days. Yeah, but on that note, I think it was a beautiful discussion. Loved it. For people who are listening, if you are also interested in buying the book, Eating the Present and Tasting the Future, of course, the link of the book is in the show note. You can go and buy yourself. And all the other books, both the books, the Delhi and then the food guide, will be also in the show note. So go for it. Check it out. Mm-hmm. Where can people find you, Charmaine? Where can they stalk you and find about all your wonderful work that you're doing?
Well, I mean, I think I sent you that. Did I send you the link to I've got an Instagram account. I've got a Facebook account. I've sent LinkedIn as well. They're the places to find me.
Lovely.
I do have a website, but it's woefully out of date, and I actually have a full-time job as well. I work in knowledge translation in a university, so I'm not necessarily always on top of things like websites. But you can. I think it's pretty easy to find me if people
on social media.
I'm happy to hear from people. And as I kept saying, it's just so gratifying for me just to hear from you guys that you use my formal work and you appreciate it. It's really, really lovely for me to hear that.
And
this was a charming conversation.
I see what you did there.
Good.
I see what you did there.
I'm sure that's the first time Charmaine has heard that. I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, on that note, we're going to karo our dukaan band. Lovely conversation, all the discussion, all the social media, book and everything for people to explore further are in the show note. Jaye click kare, and with that, jaye kebab shabab khaiye. Okay, dukaan band. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network.
You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com.
You can also follow us on our social media. We are @IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.
And if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, I am Hussain Sadaf1, and on Instagram, I am Sadaf_Hussain. You can reach out to Archit
On Twitter, @BanTofu, and on Instagram, @The Hustling Glutton.